The airport buzzed with the usual energy of travelers rushing to their gates, announcements echoing overhead, and staff attending to passengers. Among the sea of people, a poised and elegant woman stepped into the terminal. Dressed in a chic white blouse and tailored pants, Melania Trump carried herself with quiet confidence, her demeanor calm yet commanding. She approached the check-in counter, holding her first-class ticket in hand. The staff member behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with a sharp gaze and an air of superiority, barely glanced at her. Instead, the staff member focused on Melania's simple attire, clearly unimpressed. "Excuse me, ma'am," the staff member said, her tone clipped. "This line is for first-class passengers only." Melania offered a polite smile. "I know," she replied, her voice soft but assured, holding out her ticket for verification. The staff member raised an eyebrow, her gaze drifting between Melania and the ticket. Her skepticism was evident as she leaned slightly closer, scrutinizing the ticket as if it were counterfeit. "Are you sure this is your ticket?" she asked, her tone laced with condescension. Melania's smile faded slightly. "Yes, it is," she said firmly, her voice steady. But instead of checking the ticket, the staff member motioned to a security guard nearby. "I think we need to verify this," she said loudly, drawing the attention of other passengers. The security guard approached, his imposing figure adding weight to the unfolding scene. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. "I believe this passenger may be in the wrong line," the staff member said dismissively, ignoring Melania's composed demeanor. Melania opened her mouth to speak, but before she could respond, the staff member cut her off. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside until we sort this out." The crowd murmured, some passengers whispering as they recognized Melania. Others simply watched, curious about the developing tension. With grace, Melania stepped aside, but her expression revealed a flicker of disbelief at the treatment she was receiving. She stood quietly near the counter, her posture upright and dignified, as the staff member continued her dismissive behavior. Unbeknownst to the staff, Melania was not alone. Her husband, Donald Trump, was nearby, and his arrival would soon change everything. As Melania stood quietly by the side, the murmurs among the passengers grew louder. Some recognized her, their whispers filled with shock and disbelief. "Isn't that Melania Trump?" one woman whispered to her friend. "What's she doing here without security swarming around her?" The staff member at the counter, however, remained oblivious, too consumed by her own assumptions to notice the growing stir. Melania, composed as ever, didn't react to the whispers or the curious glances. Instead, she calmly observed the scene, waiting for the situation to resolve itself. Meanwhile, just outside the terminal, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the door, and Donald Trump emerged. Dressed in his signature suit and tie, he carried the air of someone who commanded attention wherever he went. Spotting Melania through the terminal's glass doors, he immediately noticed the tension in the air. His expression shifted, his brows furrowing slightly as he made his way inside. Back at the counter, the staff member was still speaking to the security guard. "I'm just saying," she insisted loudly, "we can't just let anyone waltz into first class. We have standards to maintain." The security guard looked uncomfortable but nodded slightly, unsure how to handle the situation. Melania remained silent, her composed demeanor unwavering, though a flicker of frustration crossed her face. Suddenly, the automatic doors slid open, and Donald Trump strode into the terminal. His presence was impossible to ignore. The conversations among the passengers stopped abruptly, replaced by stunned silence. Even the staff member froze, her confident expression faltering as she realized who had just entered. Donald walked straight toward Melania, his stride purposeful. "Melania," he said, his voice carrying a calm authority. "Is everything all right?" Melania turned to him, her expression softening slightly. "I'm fine," she said simply, though the undertone of the situation was clear. Donald's gaze shifted to the staff member, who now stood stiffly behind the counter, her face pale. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone even but firm. The staff member opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She glanced nervously at the security guard, who quickly averted his eyes. Donald waited for an answer, his steady gaze making it clear that he wouldn't let the matter go unnoticed. The entire terminal seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The silence in the terminal was deafening as Donald Trump fixed his gaze on the staff member. Her confidence from earlier had evaporated, replaced by visible discomfort. Passengers around them stood frozen, some whispering nervously, others pulling out their phones to record the unfolding scene. "Well?" Donald asked, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the tension. "I asked if there was a problem here." The staff member finally found her voice, though it trembled as she spoke. I wasn't sure if Mrs. Trump was in the correct line," she stammered. There was some confusion about her ticket. Donald raised an eyebrow, his expression a mix of disbelief and frustration. Confusion? About her ticket? He glanced at Melania, who stood quietly beside him, her grace unshaken. "Did you even check it?" he asked, his tone pointed. The staff member faltered, avoiding his gaze. "Well, You didn't, did you?" Donald interrupted, his voice now carrying a harder edge. He turned to the security guard. "And you just went along with it without asking any questions?" The guard shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The staff member, realizing she had no excuse, looked down, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Donald took a step closer to the counter, his presence dominating the space. "You know, it's one thing to make a mistake," he said, his voice steady but commanding. "But it's another thing entirely to treat someone with disrespect because of your assumptions. Especially someone like my wife, who carries herself with more dignity and class than anyone in this building." The crowd murmured in agreement, with some passengers nodding and others whispering their support. The staff member looked as though she wished the ground would swallow her whole. Donald continued, his tone now calmer but no less firm. "I'm sure you've had a long day, but that doesn't excuse treating people this way. Whether you knew who she was or not, everyone deserves respect." Melania placed a gentle hand on Donald's arm, her voice soft but clear. "It's all right," she said. "Let's not make this worse for anyone." Donald turned to her, his expression softening. "I'm just making sure they understand," he said, his tone protective. "No one should be treated like this." The supervisor of the terminal, alerted by the growing commotion, hurried over. Her expression was a mix of panic and concern as she approached the counter. "Mr. Trump, Mrs. Trump," she began, her voice breathless. "I sincerely apologize for this misunderstanding. Please allow me to personally ensure everything is handled properly." Donald gave the supervisor a sharp look but said nothing, waiting to see how she would handle the situation. Melania, ever gracious, nodded politely, though her silence spoke volumes. The supervisor turned to the staff member and security guard, her voice low but firm. "We'll discuss this later," she said. "For now, I'll take over." The staff member nodded meekly, stepping back from the counter. The security guard, equally chastised, followed suit. The supervisor turned back to the Trumps, her expression contrite. "Please, let me escort you to the VIP lounge while we prepare everything for your flight." Donald hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Thank you," he said curtly, placing a protective hand on Melania's back as they walked toward the lounge. The passengers watched them go, the tension in the air slowly dissipating but the lesson lingering. As Donald and Melania entered the VIP lounge, the atmosphere immediately shifted. The staff inside straightened their posture, their faces a mix of professionalism and nervousness as they greeted the couple. The supervisor personally escorted them to the most exclusive seating area, ensuring their comfort. "Please let me know if there's anything else I can do to make up for this unfortunate incident," the supervisor said, her voice almost pleading. Melania offered a gracious smile. Thank you. I think we'll be fine now, she replied, her tone calm but carrying an unspoken message. The matter was far from forgotten. Donald remained silent, his expression unreadable as he sat beside Melania. He glanced at her, his protective nature still evident. You didn't deserve that, he said quietly. No one does. Melania placed her hand gently on his. It's all right, she said softly. It's important that people learn from these moments. Meanwhile, outside the lounge, word of the incident continued to spread through the terminal. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation shared videos and photos online, and the story quickly went viral. Social media platforms buzzed with reactions, with hashtags like #RespectEveryone and #MelaniaTrump trending within minutes. One video, in particular, gained traction. It captured Donald's composed yet firm defense of Melania, his words resonating with viewers. Comments poured in, praising both his protective stance and Melania's grace under pressure. Class act, one user wrote. They handled that with dignity. Why do people judge so quickly? Lesson learned for that staff member, another commented. Back in the lounge, the supervisor discreetly stepped away to handle the fallout from the situation. She issued a formal apology on behalf of the airport, ensuring it would reach the public before the incident spiraled further. As Donald and Melania sat quietly, a member of the lounge staff approached them, holding a tray with refreshments. Mr. and Mrs. Trump, she began nervously, it's an honor to have you here. I'm deeply sorry for what happened earlier. If there's anything at all you need, please don't hesitate to ask. Donald nodded, his tone softening slightly. Thank you. Just make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. The staff member nodded quickly, retreating to give them space. Melania looked at Donald, her expression thoughtful. Sometimes it takes moments like these to remind people to treat everyone with respect, she said. Donald leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. It's a reminder they won't forget anytime soon. As they waited for their flight, the lounge filled with a quiet buzz. Passengers entering the lounge stole glances at the couple, whispering about what had happened. Donald and Melania, however, remained composed, their presence commanding but calm. The staff in the lounge worked with renewed precision, ensuring that every passenger, regardless of status, received exceptional treatment. It was clear that the incident had sparked a lesson in humility and professionalism. As their flight time approached, the buzz outside the VIP lounge continued to grow. Airport staff, passengers, and even journalists had caught wind of what had happened. Videos of Donald Trump's calm but firm defense of Melania, paired with her poised demeanor, dominated the internet, sparking debates and discussions about respect and assumptions. Inside the lounge, Donald's phone buzzed with notifications, but he ignored them, his focus still on Melania. You always manage to stay so composed, he said, breaking the silence. I don't know how you do it. Melania smiled faintly, her tone light. Years of practice, she said. Besides, there are bigger things in life than a rude airport staff member. Before Donald could respond, the supervisor returned, her face flushed but determined. Mr. and Mrs. Trump, she began, your flight is ready for boarding. Please allow me to personally escort you to the gate. Donald stood, straightening his tie, while Melania gracefully rose from her seat. As they walked through the lounge, passengers turned to watch, their admiration evident. Some offered small nods of respect, while others whispered quietly, still in awe of the earlier incident. As they reached the gate, the staff there greeted them with the utmost courtesy, their professionalism now heightened by the weight of what had transpired. The supervisor led them to the first-class boarding area, ensuring no detail was overlooked. Thank you for your understanding today, she said, her voice sincere. I can assure you, the staff involved will be held accountable, and we're taking steps to ensure this never happens again. Donald gave her a curt nod, his tone firm but fair. That's what I want to hear. It's not just about us, it's about everyone being treated with dignity. The supervisor nodded, her expression a mixture of relief and respect. As Donald and Melania boarded the plane, the passengers in the gate area watched them go, their presence leaving a lasting impression. Seated comfortably in first class, Melania glanced out the window, her expression calm but reflective. Donald leaned slightly toward her. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" he asked. Melania smiled softly. "I'm thinking about how one moment can teach so many people a lesson," she replied. "Not just the staff, but everyone who saw it." Donald nodded in agreement, his tone quieter now. "That's true. And sometimes, the best way to teach is by example." As the plane began to taxi down the runway, the incident at the airport felt like a closed chapter. But its impact would continue to ripple outward, reminding everyone who witnessed it, and the countless people online, about the importance of humility, respect, and grace under pressure. As the plane soared above the clouds, the story of the airport incident continued to gain traction online. Headlines across major platforms read, "Donald and Melania Trump show grace under fire at airport," and "Trump defends wife against unfair treatment, a lesson in respect." The videos and pictures captured by passengers had gone viral, sparking widespread discussions about judgment and professionalism. Meanwhile, back at the airport, the staff involved in the incident faced immediate consequences. The supervisor held an emergency meeting, addressing the importance of treating every passenger with dignity, regardless of their appearance or perceived status. "We're here to serve people," she emphasized, "not to judge them." The staff member who had dismissed Melania earlier sat quietly, her head lowered as the weight of her actions sank in. She realized the impact of her assumptions and vowed to approach her role with more empathy moving forward. On board the flight, Donald and Melania sat quietly in first class, enjoying a brief moment of respite. A flight attendant approached them cautiously, her demeanor respectful but kind. "Mr. and Mrs. Trump," she began, "on behalf of our airline, I want to extend our sincerest apologies for what happened earlier. It's an honor to have you with us." Donald nodded politely. "Thank you," he said, his tone measured. "Just make sure this becomes a learning moment for everyone involved." Melania smiled warmly at the attendant. "We appreciate your kindness," she said softly. As the flight continued, Melania reflected on the day's events. "Do you think they'll truly change?" she asked Donald, her voice thoughtful. "They will," Donald replied confidently. "Because now the whole world is watching." By the time they landed, the incident had sparked not only widespread attention but also a wave of introspection. Social media was flooded with comments about respect and humility, with many praising the Trumps for their composed handling of the situation. One tweet stood out, "Today, Donald and Melania Trump reminded us all that no matter who you are, everyone deserves to be treated with respect." A powerful example of grace under pressure. As they exited the plane and walked through the arrival terminal, the atmosphere was entirely different. Staff members and passengers alike greeted them with smiles and nods of admiration. The incident at the check-in counter had become more than just a moment of conflict, it had become a lesson that resonated far beyond the walls of the airport. For Donald and Melania, it wasn't about seeking attention or making a spectacle. It was about standing up for what was right, showing the world that even in the face of disrespect, grace and dignity could prevail. And for everyone who had witnessed it, the memory of that day would serve as a lasting reminder of the power of respect, humility, and strength of character.